A Blurring Line, Chapter 14, The Coming of Arthur, Part 2. Iseldir had seen the three figures coming long before they reached the camp, not only through the scouts, who'd seen Emrys's aura well before they'd spotted the person it was coming from. She was not alone, but they had known she would not be, or at least he had known, him and their camp seer, Gilda. Every druid camp tried to find at least one seer. They were handy to have around when well trained, and could often suffer from their visions, something the druids had learned to alleviate. Gilda had been with them for as long as many of them could remember. It was few, those druids who grew into gray hairs. Perhaps her gift had helped with that. She had warned him some days ago that Emrys was coming for the cup with Uther's son, and another she did not recognize. She did not know what would come if they were refused. She had only seen the three of them. By rights, the cup was hers, not theirs. One of their number had taken a pilgrimage to the Isle of the Blessed near a year ago after Emrys had saved their camp. He had wished to commune with the gods, the goddess of magic if he could, to thank her for sending her champion to them. He had returned in possession of the cup, and with the information that the last priestess who had held out on the isle was dead. Nimue had been dead for some time if the evidence was anything to go by. It was bittersweet. She had long ago lost herself to her vengeance on Camelot, no longer caring who she harmed in her vendetta. She had become Uther in all but name, single-minded in her pursuits of a goal. So blinded by hatred, Isildir doubted she'd ever seen Emrys for what she was, or really bothered to look. But so much knowledge was lost with her. Still, they had hidden the cup as best they could and saved those they could with it. The trade of life and death was only one of the cup's powers. It was a vessel of pure healing when used properly. Those not shaking hands with death could be healed with little consequence. Healing Sir Leon had been a decision that had caused some grumbling until Gilda revealed that he was a close ally of Emrys, hiding her from the scrutiny of Uther. He would be needed yet, and if he died, the future was lost. She did not often reveal things like that, and when she did, it was dire, as it had been. Most of the camp hid when the three entered. A few of the children had to be held by their parents, too excited about seeing Emrys again to contain themselves. One such child, little Sarah, had not been grabbed in time. She was only 5, and Emrys had been kind to her last time. Olenna reached out to grab her daughter before she could rush out, but she wasn't quite fast enough. Little Sarah almost bowled Emrys off her feet, hugging her at her knees. To her credit, she kept her feet and waved a near-frantic hand at her companions, both of whom had drawn their weapons. Sarah, seeming to realize her mistake, buried her face in Emrys's skirts and trembled. The dark-haired man put his sword up at Emrys's wave, but the prince was reluctant to disarm himself. Emrys knelt so she was on Sarah's level, as she had near a year ago when they had met and Sarah had gifted her a crown of flowers. "We need to speak with your camp leader," she said lowly. She had angled herself so she was between Arthur and the child. The other man was still on guard, but did not seem to wish to harm a child. Uther had proved himself willing to end anyone with magic, no matter their age. Isildir would not risk his son feeling the same. "You come seeking the cup of life," he said, stepping forward. Arthur tensed further and Merlin stood back up, and with their attention pulled away from her, Sarah darted back to her mother, shaking slightly. "Forgive her. She mistook you for someone else," Isildir said, providing an excuse at the slight panic well masked in Emrys's eyes. Arthur stepped forward. "We're here for the cup." "How did you know that?" he demanded. "How does not matter," Isildir said, pulling the cup out of his cloak. "You are here for the cup. It is yours," he said, tossing the cup not to Arthur, but Emrys, who caught it one-handed, looking somewhat surprised, but not as surprised as Arthur and their companion. "Compassion is a gift few offer these days, even to our children," he said aloud. In his mind, he reached out to Emrys. "The cup is yours to protect now. Be cautious, Emrys." "Well, That was much simpler than I thought it would be, the dark-haired man said as they left, the two men in confusion, Emrys looking contemplative. He could not help but wonder how this would turn out. Gilda had not specified, only told him it was his choice to give up the cup or no. Arthur couldn't breathe. The pain in his leg was trying to tear at him again, but it was as if everything in him had gone numb when the words left Morgana's mouth. I am your daughter, after all. If it hadn't been spat at their father with such malice, Arthur might have been delighted by the news. He had always wanted a family, feeling so alone as a child. Morgana had been one of his closest friends, but he did not know the woman now sitting atop the throne of Camelot. There was a vicious glint in her eyes, a look of sheer and vindictive joy as their father was dragged from the room, looking nearly broken. The gathered nobility and serving staff, surrounded by an unkillable army, were made to bow and curtsy in turn. Arthur might have remained frozen there for the rest of time, still trying to process what had just happened, if it were not for Merlin, silently hauling him back to his feet. She dragged him into the shadows and out of the balcony above the throne room. Merlin risked a few of the secret passages, none of those that needed magic to be opened, but she needed to get Arthur out without being seen. If they raised the alarm now, neither of them would make it out alive. As they made it out to the courtyard on the edge of Camelot, she was forced to pull him down behind a few crates. There were 2 patrols here, wearing the armor of Senred's men and the dead-eyed stare of Morgose's undead army. They were standing guard, she swore under her breath, situated Arthur, still stunned, under a tarp. He barely blinked, not that she blamed him. She slid into the stable through a barely ajar back door. She calmed the horses with a touch. Quickly, she went around the stable, untying them, keeping them calm with just the barest amount of magic. She needed them to not panic just yet. She needed a way to ensure that they would be followed. The horses, that was. Pulling the dagger Uther had given her out of her belt, she set it aside, quickly pulling her braid over her shoulder. She sawed through it, her hair falling loose at the ends. As the end of the braid fell into her hand, she tied the remainder of it to Dancer's lead rope, and with a word, the horses gathered at the door of the stable, Dancer shedding her hair as he went. Merlin summoned a flame in her hand and lit the hay. Releasing the spell on the horses, she let them bolt out of the stable, ducking out the way she'd come in, and snagging Arthur out of the stack of boxes. She took most of his weight, though she couldn't tell if it was shock at Morgana's betrayal or his injury causing him to be nearly catatonic. She could worry about that later. The guards were chasing the horses, making it easy for them to slip out as the stable went up in flames. Merlin adjusted Arthur's arm around her shoulder, and he blinked. You cut your hair, he said, sounding confused. Gave Morgana something else to chase for a minute. Let's catch up with the others, she said, glancing back over her shoulder as the fire within the wall lit up the white walls of Camelot.